from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the North Idaho College Public Forum. On behalf of Janelle Burke, on our panel and our staff, we're very pleased to welcome you to a two-part series, both this week and next week. We're going to walk through music, and I would simply title these two programs as The Story of History Through Music. We have two very special guests who we're very honored to have on this program. They certainly have great credentials in the field of music. Our guests come to us from Hartford, Connecticut, and they are residing at the University of Idaho at least for a year, while one of our guests is in graduate school there. Our guests are Maggie Smith Dalton and Jim Dalton. They have formerly been known as Sean Terrell, but they now go by their names and perform their music. They have performed up and down the East Coast and have performed at universities and colleges and concerts. Their list of appearances is a very impressive one. I'm also extremely impressed with what they do. They have great diversity in their work. They work in the area of classical and jazz and folk music. They have done much in American, Celtic, and British Isles music. The list of concerts they do is a very, very long list, and they've gone into much research in order for that to happen. For example, they do music by, for, and about women. They have a concert on American history through music, music of Washington, Lincoln, and Martin Luther King. And another example is the roots of American pop music. Maggie and Jim, welcome to our program. We're happy to have you here both this week and next week, and we're going to talk to you about music and what you do. And of course, you've been so gracious as to agree to perform for us on both these programs, and I know our viewers will want to tune in again next week as we continue to even have more music on that program than this one. Welcome to the North Idaho College Public Forum.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have regular panelist Janelle Burke. She is commencing her 20th year out of our 22 years with the Public Forum, and I shall invite Janelle to commence our questioning today.
So that our readers can get to know you better, would you please, Maggie, tell us how did you meet? And then we'd like to ask Jim a question. We'll turn to Jim and we'll ask him how did you begin to work together? But so that our viewers can have a better understanding. Maggie, can we start with you?
Well,
how
everyone always likes the love story part, yes. Jim and I were working in the same nightclub. I did popular music in nightclubs for 11 years, and Jim also played in that capacity. And we had never met. I had done a job with another singer, a male singer, and he was playing at this club on a different night. So I dropped in to visit my friend, and Jim was on stage. And I first fell in love with the way he played, and then I noticed he was pretty nice looking too, and I decided to stick around and see what else I could find out. It really started there that we were playing in the same club, but on different nights, and had never met until I dropped in after another gig had ended nearby.
And what kind of music were you playing at that time?
That time I was playing adult contemporary music, pop and folk music.
And so then, Jim, you decided that the two of you would begin to work together? Is that kind of how it evolved? And,
yes.
And how did you start your music together?
Well, it took a little while at first, actually, because we both had, we were in situations where people knew us separately, and we both had built careers separately at that point. But we started working together even then in New Jersey, and then moved, shortly after we were married, we moved to Connecticut. And there, being in a new region and not having much of a reputation as individuals, we were able to start over again as a duet. And just started putting all of our efforts into doing that at that point.
And changing our format to concerts.
Yes. Now, as I understand it, you are using concerts that also have a historical basis or have some kind of a theme. They're theme concerts. They're not just a concert that involves music, but it's a theme concert, and I take it that you do some study. So, Maggie, can you tell us how this kind of works into your academic discipline, how you would use it, and then we'll ask Jim the same kind of question, how your academic disciplines work into the program.
Well, not all the concerts are themed concerts. We give a lot of them because there was an interest. How it started is we were doing music that we felt was important, not only that would be popular, but was important to bring to our audiences, and started doing commentary during the concerts, just regular concerts, and found that people really enjoyed that aspect of it. And that's how it started to grow. In Connecticut, the Victorian era was very much of a popular, it was still in the air, so to speak. So our very first concert that was put together specifically as a theme with research and narrative was a Victorian parlor song concert. As far as it fitting into my discipline, this is the second passion of my life. Music is first. Oh, well, Jim is first. And then music is second. And history has always been, from the time I was very small, a passion. And it was just a lovely way of combining those passions and making a living from what you love to do. And it just grew like Topsy, if you'll pardon the pun.
And then, Jim, how does it fit into your music background, your academic discipline that is music?
Well, my background first was in classical guitar, and in addition to that, I got involved playing the Renaissance lute. And when you play instruments like the lute, you get involved in what they call authentic performance practice, and you start looking into the way concerts were actually performed on the early instruments. And since then, my interest in all the other instruments that I play, the mandolin and the banjo, have always had this kind of historical slant to them. I don't play the banjo in the modern way. I play the banjo the way it was played 160 years ago. And same thing with the mandolin. So having the historical angle to it helps to explain to an audience why I would play it in a certain way, and fits into my interests that way too.
You're very versatile. How many instruments do you play?
Mostly
Or
just.
can you count the number?
Well, I never bothered to count them. There really aren't as many as all that. It's not beyond counting.
I always make the joke that the instruments have their own room and I don't,
But mostly plucked string instruments: guitar, mandolin, banjo, lute. There's a little South American instrument called the charango, and then there are various other ways of playing all of those, and other ethnic plucked string instruments, the Greek bouzouki, the mandocello, which is kind of a bass mandolin, things like that.
I've been working with you for some time getting ready for this program, and you were very kind to send a lot of information about your work. And I guess what I found, I would think probably unique about you is the historical research that you've done, putting these concerts together, the incredible number of hours that you spend in libraries. And I would like for you to give our audience a little bit of an insight as you tour and you perform. I understand your hours off when you're not performing. You're oftentimes in libraries. What amount of time have you put into researching the history of
I don't think we have
movements?
any time off. I really don't. We do not take vacations. They're always research trips, even if they started out as vacations. And we find our music in some usual areas, as you mentioned, libraries and the usual research centers. But we also find them in unusual places like antique stores. There'll be a pile of music in the corner no one's looked at in 30 years till we come along. We've found a lot of our stuff in antique bookstores as well. And we have an immense library at home. It's why we don't own a home. We spend it all in books. And we have over 3,000 volumes just in our own personal library on these two subjects, music and history. And really, wherever we go, whether it's from Maine to Georgia or across the country now, we have always stopped and poked around and seen what we can see. We're always on the alert.
And Jim, both of you do this as a team, don't you, as far as the research? And
yes.
What do? Do you pick a particular area of history and then go back and see what music has gone through that period?
Sometimes it actually works the opposite way too. We'll be looking through piles of music, or usually in libraries they just put sheet music into boxes, and they're completely uncatalogued most of the time. So we'll ask for a box of 19th century American music and start shifting through it and find something that's just startling to us, perhaps, and then put together a program, it'll be the germ of an idea for a program anyway, and will eventually grow into one that way.
My suspicion is that you find so much within a period that you can really change your concert within that subject and have a lot of variety if you choose to do so.
Yes.
That's very true. Unless you're doing a specific, for instance, Victorian parlor songs, that's a specific genre of song, and you kind of, although you're not limited in terms of how much material, there are zillions of parlor songs. There is a particular style, so then the challenge is to vary within that style, within that genre, to make the concert interesting in terms of pacing too. And it's always a challenge, and there's always little anecdotal things we're picking up on to put into concerts too.
This is a good time to tell our viewers that we're going to have music in 3 parts, counting this week and next week. I'm going to, in a moment, introduce and have you to perform in one of those 3 areas. You have called this one, What a Weapon is the Ballad, and this goes from George Washington, the presidency, through to Richard Nixon, and we're going to do 3 numbers. I shouldn't say we, you are going to do 3 numbers.
You're going to join us, huh, Tony?
That could be the end of the program. And then next week when you come back, we're going to do a section in which you're going to discuss the celebration of liberty, and then you are doing a section on women's program. I just want the viewers to know what to expect for this 2-week period. Let's do a little discussion and then get into those numbers. What do you mean by the title, What a Weapon is the Ballad, and explain that period and how you have dealt with that?
Well, this particular program was put together specifically for the election year of, do you remember what year it was? 86?
88.
88? We thought it would be interesting, especially with all the mudslinging that was supposedly being flung around, to look and to see if this has been a long and honored tradition in American politics. Indeed it has, and some of it's been sung mud. So we had a little bit of fun putting it together, and we honestly thought we would do the program a couple of times during an election year, put it away again, and revive it every 4 years, but it hasn't turned out to be that way. It's our 3rd most popular program. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a campaign song survey from Washington to Nixon, which is where it kind of peters out, and deservedly so. If we have time, we'll show you why. The songs themselves were such an integral part of the rallies and things like that, that they're documents also of involvement, which is not really present today. And as far as the title goes, we took it from the song we finish up with, What a Weapon is the Ballad, is the name of one of the songs that was used in actually the socialist campaign, but it spoke to our need as Americans to vote so well that we thought it just fit. It was an attractive title.
I want you to get time without being rushed so the viewers can hear. And the very first number that you're going to perform is in 1884, I believe. Is it Mama, Mama, Where's My Pa? Or
Yes.
would you like to explain what campaign that came from and so forth, and then perform that for us?
Sure. Why don't you?
This is the campaign of 1884, as you said, and this is Grover Cleveland, who was kind of an old fuddy-duddy type of guy, but in the 19th century that was pretty cool to be a fuddy-duddy. And he was running against James G. Blaine, who was a very charismatic person. And what happened, as briefly as I can tell it in this campaign, is you had this dull, stodgy Cleveland whose biggest claim was that he was honest. In fact, the newspapers in his hometown in Buffalo came out with stuff for him simply because he is honest, he is honest, he is honest, he is honest. That's all they could say about him. So the other side, the Blaine side, looked for something they could show, that they could say that to show he wasn't that honest, and they came up with this terrible scandal that he had fathered this illegitimate child by this woman. There was a screaming headline that said, "The pitiful story of Maria Halpin and Governor Cleveland's son." Well, he was the only unmarried man who was associated with this woman. All the other men that associated with her were married, and he took on the responsibility of the child. And when it was brought to him that this scandal was about to erupt, to his credit, he said, "Don't try to hide it, just tell the truth." However, at rallies, the other side, trying to use this as mud sung the mud, as I said. And they would stay at a rally for Cleveland, and all of a sudden a group of them would just start to sing, "Mama, where's my pa?" And you'll see why it was insulting to the Cleveland side. Mama, where is my pa? Up in the White House, darling, making the laws, working the cause. Up in the White House, dear. Ma, where is Papa? Up in the White House, darling, making the laws, working the cause. Up in the White House, dear.
You have a very beautiful voice. And
Well, I tried to be pitiful.
congratulations to both of you on lovely music.
What you might find amusing also is that after the campaign they said, "Mama, where's my pa? Gone to the White House, ha ha ha."
You read that in history books from time to time.
Right.
The second number that you're doing is called Celebrate the End of War. Would you like to explain how that fits into this concert and into history?
Sure. This is from Woodrow Wilson's second campaign, and he had campaigned on the slogan that he kept us out of war. And one of the interesting things about this, as you go through the historical programs, you find that the style of music changed with the popular styles of the time, and the popular style of that time was ragtime. And we just thought it really unusual. I mean, the full title of the song, first of all, is "We're going to celebrate the end of war in ragtime. Be sure that Woodrow Wilson leads the band." And for anyone that's ever seen a photograph of Woodrow Wilson, he just doesn't look like a ragtime kind of guy, you know. So,
if I could interject here,
sure.
From another interview of yours that you had, he was the stoic type of person. The image was of President Wilson. But he was more flexible in his personality and all than was.
You bet he was.
Would you like to briefly explain
Oh, Woodrow Wilson's one of my favorite guys because behind doors he was a real party guy. He said to his children that he envied the life of minstrel performers and would often take them upstairs in the White House and close the door and show them how to dance a jig properly. He also liked to sing. He had a very nice tenor voice. He loved to sing, loved music, and was very devoted to music. So actually, even though his public persona sounds ridiculous to have him doing ragtime, he actually loved this kind of music. So behind the scenes, there's a little more to it.
behind the scenes personality and the public personality?
Yeah, he was real conscious of that.
Okay. We would enjoy that number.
Everybody's asking when we will be at peace again. Everybody wants prosperity. I hear many people say, throw the swords and guns away, but they're still fighting across the sea. The end must the end of war in ragtime. Every nation soon will sing in rag rhyme. England, France, and Germany, even folks in Italy, the aristocrats and the diplomats marching arm in arm, see them tip their hats to a raggy melody, so pretty. Everywhere there's harmony. So when we celebrate the end of war in ragtime, be sure that Woodrow Wilson leads the band. Be sure that Woodrow Wilson leads the band.
I feel we should be in an auditorium with a large audience and we can have
What do we do with
standing ovation
I have to have
following
people
this
waving
number.
flags. and things like
Yes,
that.
those audio visuals that are a great help. We're going to do one more number before we go back to Janelle. We've taken a lot of time away from Janelle today on the program, but another number that you do is What a Welcome is the Ballad. And tell us a little more about that. We mentioned it a moment ago, and then we'll have you to perform that number. Maggie, would you like to?
This was
share
used
that?
in the socialist campaign, but it's a good example in general of the way songs were commandeered for political campaigns in this country, particularly in the 19th century. What you wanted to do when you wanted to rally people to your cause, whatever that cause might be, is give them a feeling that it was a moral cause. It was a very big thing in the 19th century. And very often this was done by taking, right from the beginning of American history, it was done by taking a hymn tune and fitting your words to it. So you had this undercurrent of moral fervor with the words. And the socialists were real good at this. As I said before, we chose this song because, in general, it speaks to our responsibilities and privileges as Americans. And that's why we end with it, try to get everybody all ready to go out there and vote and use the weapon that you were given by the Constitution to change things.
Okay, with that, we'd love to hear the number.
What a weapon is the ballad. All our wrongs and ills to cure. When oppression grows so heavy that we can no more endure. Oh, what ills we often suffer when oppression o'er us rolls. Ah, because we do not carry every burden to the Are you homeless, poor and wandering? Though you've toiled throughout the year, are your wife and children needy? Is the future dark and drear? Has your labor not refreshed you? Are there landlords grasping tolls? You must never be discouraged. You can write it at the polls.
That was very beautiful, and I know with that we have viewers that would love to know how to get in touch with you about the possibility of a concert. So we're going to ask them to put up on the screen your telephone number while you're in Moscow, Idaho, and I will give the address for you. And that is in Moscow, Idaho, Post Office Box 8765. I would repeat, Post Office Box 8765, Moscow, Idaho 83843, and the telephone number is come up on the screen, which is area code 208-882-4474. Janelle, we have about a minute and a half left.
Okay, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about this course that you're going to be offering soon at the University of Idaho. So, Jim, let's start with you, and can you tell us what the course is going to be, because some of our viewers might want to take part in that course.
Sure. It's, well, we have a number of them, but the most important one that's connected to what we're doing here is called Victorian to Victrola, and it's a kind of brief discussion of American history through music. In how many sessions is that?
4 sessions.
4 sessions, and we're basically covering from the Victorian period, about the middle of the 19th century through to the beginning of the 20th century, and early American popular music, but covering the history and the music of those periods.
Are you going to teach people how to perform, or are you going to mainly just survey what the music was that was going on during those periods of time?
It'll be surveying the music from that period. In 4 weeks it would be difficult to be able to teach anybody to perform that music, although sometimes we when there are tunes that are familiar, we have the audiences join in and sing the refrains.
Okay, with that, I have the signal that we're out of time. The bad news is that we're out of time and we can't do more. The good news is that you'll be back next week and we will have more of your wonderful music at that time. Thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week when Maggie Smith Dalton and Jim Dalton will continue this very fine music. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station. From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the second week of the North Idaho College Public Forum with our very special guest, Maggie Smith Dalton and Jim Dalton. For you who could not be with us last week, they were here and just had a delightful time with their music. They are very talented. They are known in the past as Sean Terrell, and now they go by their names as a music group. They do many concerts. I believe I counted 20 or 25 different areas that they do. We are describing this 2-week series as the story of history through music. And the reason for that, our guests have gone through history and put together these concerts. They have one concert that is from George Washington to Richard Nixon for political songs and presidential elections. They do women's programs and music and many, many other fields. In fact, they are involved with classical, jazz, and folk music. I want to also add that they have some recordings that are very outstanding, commercial recordings on both folk and pop music, and you might, after hearing this program and hearing their music, certainly want to get some of the recordings. I'm going to start today, too, by indicating that they are from Hartford, Connecticut, and they have performed up and down the East Coast, and now they are in residence at the University of Idaho, where Jim is getting his master's degree in music for this year, and that's why we're so fortunate to be able to have them here with us. I would also add that for you who would like to have their address or their telephone number, we will do that later in the program near the end. Our two guests, too, are graduates, in the case of Maggie Smith-Dalton from Skidmore College and Jim Dalton from Rutgers University. It's a pleasure to have you back, and it's so good of you to take this much time to contribute to the public forum. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us again.
I'm always happy to have Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho and is a regular panelist. And by the way, Janelle also has a graduate degree in music, and she's very accomplished in music, and it's very appropriate for her to be here to question our guest. And with that, I shall invite Janelle to commence the questioning.
Well, Jim, let's begin with you, and let's talk a little bit about authenticity. When you're talking about music from other periods of history, how do you determine what's authentic, and how do you decide how much authenticity you're going to use, or whether you're going to elevate it to a more artistic form? You're going to use the basics of what was going on then, you're going to add a little something to it. How do you decide on authenticity?
Well, sometimes it has to do with the placement in the program or the specific type of program we're doing. If we're doing a program of all one period of music, then we'll try to be very authentic with the performance. For instance, we'll do Victorian parlor music and try to have everything be as appropriate as possible, using instruments from the period. And I'll go back into tutors' books of instruction for the various instruments and study how the actual techniques that were used in playing. We'll get the earliest copy of sheet music that we can for any particular song, and Maggie has done some study into the vocal styles of the time. And then other times, especially if we're doing a program that covers a wider amount of time in terms of musical style periods, we'll balance really authentic styles of performance with things that we'll interpret more in our own way. Sometimes that has more to do with what instruments we're doing, too, what instruments we're using. If a piece was originally written for piano, there has to be some adaptation over to the instruments that we use.
Now, Maggie, you have indicated that you do lots of work with libraries. You go to the library and you study. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, the way Jim and I have evolved our working style is kind of interesting. He does more of the musicological research, although as he mentioned, I do the vocal stuff. And I tend to research the narratives, the anecdotal things, the background of the piece. So I have to study not only the general works of history, but I'm always looking for the unusual thing to talk about, the bit of backstage gossip, the way the song came to be written, or famous performers, that kind of thing. So you can see right away I'm talking about reading almost anything that looks like it might even remotely be connected, including I go back to magazines or periodicals of the time if they're extant, and I look at the accounts of the concerts, I look at comments. Right now I'm doing a research project, as a matter of fact, on theatrical performances in Idaho in the vaudeville days, and the kind of things I'll be looking at for that are very, very much what we've done for these things.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, Jim. How would you go about putting together something like the Idaho story, and where would you look? Where would you begin looking to find some music for that kind of thing?
Well, in major research libraries at the universities and at historical societies, and used bookstores are great. Used bookstores and antique stores, and then beyond that, you find people whose family goes back in the area a few generations and see if they have any music that grandmother or grandfather had in their piano bench or something on that order. And that's always a good place to start. And then, and also in standard histories of the area. I mean, sometimes you'll just read in there something that'll indicate a good place to begin looking and shape
So
the
Maggie, do
story.
you do some listening too? Do you go listen to people that you think might be doing something
Oh,
from
sure.
that
Oh,
period
sure.
or might have some interest in that period?
The thing about being a performer is it's a very organic thing. You're always growing and you're always learning, and you have to be a rather bit of a sponge to pick up on avenues wherever they might lead you in terms of material you might want to do or material that you know. Another thing that we have to keep in mind when we play these programs is our audience. Our audiences range from scholarly ones at universities to the general public. So we have to have a balance of things in there that will appeal to both of those audiences. So you're always scouting and watching other people's performances and seeing what goes over and getting audience reaction.
We're going to go right into some more music, and Janelle and I had a great time with you last week and enjoying it, and we're going to do two different sections on this 30-minute program, and the first section or concert area is called the Celebration of Liberty, and you have chosen 3 numbers, and we're delighted that you did. It's my understanding on the first one you're going back to Washington's time. I should add to our viewers, when you talk about Celebration of Liberty, you're talking about the Washington period, the Lincoln period, and then Martin Luther King. You've chosen Chester. Would you explain this number and then perform it for us?
Sure. Chester is a tune that was written by William Billings, who was a composer from New England, from Boston actually. Very interesting fellow. He was a tanner by trade and a singing school teacher also, and one of the most prolific composers that America had of hymn tunes in those days. And published a number of books, and Chester was in one of the books in an earlier form than this, with different words. But these words he published in, I believe it was, no, I think it was 77, actually, 1777, and they're a little more appropriate to the struggle for independence at the time. So, this is called Chester. Chester is the name given to the tune itself. There's no actual character or anything named Chester. It was probably, as most of the hymn tunes in those days, named after a town.
Let tyrants shake their iron rod, and slavery clank her galling chains. We fear them not, we trust in God, New England's God forever reigns. The foe comes on with haughty stride, our troops advance with martial noise. Their veterans flee before our youth, and generals yield to beardless boys. What grateful offering shall we bring? What shall we render to the Lord? Loud hallelujahs let us sing, and praise His name on every chord.
Once again, it was very beautiful, just like last week. The second number from the Celebration of Liberty that you have chosen is from the Lincoln's Times, and it's called Abolitionist Hymn. And Maggie, are you going to explain this one to us?
One thing you should have noticed in that last one is how it was New England's God was going to reign forever. That's a real interesting point. And if we had a whole program, I could just go on forever about why they said that. It's very important also in this song. Again, it's a hymn. You're going to recognize it. It's the most familiar hymn possibly to all Americans everywhere, and that's called Old Hundred. And for this abolitionist movement, again, as I mentioned in the last program, a hymn was often chosen as the tune to impart that moral fervor, that sense of cause. This is no different. This is called the Abolitionist Hymn, and the words are a retort to those who claimed that freeing the slaves was just an attempt to put the slaves over the masters and let the slaves hang around doing nothing. And this song was meant to answer that charge.
We at ask not that the slave should lie, as lies his master at his ease, beneath the silken canopy, or in the shade of blooming trees. We ask not eye for eye that all who forge the chain and ply the whip should feel their torture, while the fool should wield the scourge of mastership. We mourn not that the man should toil, 'tis nature's needs, 'tis God's decree. But let the hand that tills the soil be like the hand that frames it free.
Again, wonderful, and from a very, very special concert that you do. And the third one you've taken from the Martin Luther King era and period, We Shall Overcome. And give us the background of how you've put that into your concert.
We Shall Overcome is considered the anthem of the civil rights movement in the 1960s in this country. Again, notice the religious overtones, and we have purposely chosen these songs for that reason, because it was such an integral part of politics. You know, separation of church and state, but the religious attitudes towards all these causes was very real and a prime motivator, and you can see traces of that even now. The other thing you need to notice about these songs that we've done, all three of them, is I sang them in a very straightforward way. I didn't embellish much, I didn't add much of myself, because the intention was for the audience to sing along, and I would have functioned more as a leader, and this was a very important component. This song is no different, but by the 1960s you're already seeing a little of that more do-your-own-thing thing. So even though I'm not singing it terribly embellished, it's fairly straightforward. It's a little more loose than the other two.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart,
Thank you so much. That was very wonderful. We're going to do another segment a little later in the program. We shall return to Janelle Burke.
Thanks.
Maggie, I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell our viewers something about some courses that you do offer, because music has always been a reflection down through history of the way people felt, of their expressions and so forth. It's very interesting to study about history in that way through music.
Yeah.
And you do some courses that do to offer that reflection. If people are interested in studying more about history or more about music and how music reflected history, where can they contact you and how can they get in touch with you and find out more about that?
One thing that we did in Connecticut that proved extremely popular is community outreach programs where we were residents in the community, did a residency in the community, and we offered these courses, a series every week of examining our music, more leaning on the popular developments so that it would appeal to a larger group of people. And we're doing something similar to that at the enrichment program at the University of Idaho. I almost said Hartford. Idaho. They can contact the enrichment program. Jim and I are teaching a mini course called Victorian to Victrola, which will cover about the mid-19th century and about the time of Stephen Foster, through the Civil War and up to the turn of the century where pop music became big business. And it's a way for people to understand how our music grew. It's really been our experience that people like that sort of thing. They like to have that kind of background. And we aim to make it enjoyable, impart a lot of information, but make it enjoyable. So it's really, you don't have to know anything about music, you don't have to know anything about history. It's just a way of getting your feet wet in those two subjects in a fun way.
Janelle, this would be a good time to give the telephone numbers. We have on the screen the number of your home, and we'll give that one first, and then we'll talk about the University of Idaho if they can contact them concerning the program. But
Great.
On the screen is your number, area code 208-882-4474. We'd also give them your address, which is Post Office Box 8765, Moscow, Idaho, the zip code 83843. And for those who want to get in touch with the program at the University of Idaho, again, that telephone number would be area code 208-885-6486.
Jim, I want to give you just an opportunity to perhaps tell how you might put a program together. How did you decide? Is there a particular program, say, for example, campaign songs that had an origin, and then you went out and you really looked for those songs?
Sure. Well, we were looking at one point for programs to offer and trying to come up with a new and interesting idea. And I had seen a few campaign songs, presidential campaign songs, in a book somewhere, and I didn't remember where, but I thought it might be an interesting thing to do for the election year of '88. And we went and looked into a few more songs. There's a great museum in Hartford, Connecticut called the Museum of American Political Life, and they just have an enormous amount of these campaign songs in boxes, completely uncatalogued, and we had to sit and go through every single one of them. And you find very interesting things by doing that, by the way. You find out that the campaign of 1840 had the most amazing amounts of music involved with it. That was William Henry Harrison, who only served as president for a very short time because he caught cold on his inauguration day and died. But they spent an awful lot of effort publishing songs and singing songs to get him elected, and then
He's only
really
in
lived
for a month, right.
But we went and did the research and put that program together and assumed that we would only do it a few times. But that one was really very popular and continues to be very popular. Most of the others came about in a similar way. There would be something that either one or the other of us would be interested in, and we'd know a couple of songs that might make the beginnings of a good program, and then we'd just, go into the libraries or go into our own resources at home and dig up whatever we could and flesh it out that way.
We have picked another concert that we asked you to take some numbers from. I had the privilege of looking at all this and was very eager to make some suggestions. At the end of October the 29th through the 31st, there'll be an International Human Rights Conference in Coeur d'Alene, and this year the topic is empowering women. And so I noticed that you had a women's program in your concert series, and you have chosen two numbers, and we're going to have you to do those now. and also, as we've been doing in the format, to explain the background. And my understanding, the first number you have chosen is "Father is a Drunkard and Mother is Dead." This sounds a rather interesting title for a song.
We always get a chuckle when we announce a song, and we hardly ever get a chuckle afterwards. This song is real important to women's empowerment in the United States because the two really granddaddy or grandmother movements in the 19th century was abolitionism and temperance, which actually preceded it a little bit and was there all along in a slight form. And it's through these two movements that women started to become very politically active in the United States. And this song is an example written by a woman illustrating something. It was supposedly based on a true story, but probably not. It did illustrate, however, a lot of women's experiences. If their husband was a drunkard, they had no recourse. You had no legal identity in the United States, and you basically, when you married his fortunes. And if he drank all your money away, you starved. And this story does tell. It's true in that sense, in the larger sense, and undoubtedly had many eyes in the audience streaming. And do you want to add about Mrs. Parker's?
Sure. Mrs. Parkhurst had a very interesting career. Evidently, she wrote songs mostly for movements like this. We also have another song that we do called the New Emancipation Song, which was from the abolitionist movement. But Mrs. Parkhurst's daughter, who went by the stage name of Little Effie, would get up on stage and sing this song and reduce the entire audience to tears. And Mrs. Parkhurst's career lasted only as long as Little Effie was little and still able to reduce the audience to tears that way.
Yeah.
But a very interesting composer.
So when I do this in concert, I often do it in bare feet just to be pathetic, you know.
Out in the gloomy night, sadly I roam. I have no mother dear, no precious home. Nobody cares for me, no one would cry, even if poor little Bessie should die. Barefoot and tired, I've wandered all day, asking for work, but I'm too small, they say. On the damp ground, I must now lay my head. Father's a drunkard, and mother is dead. Oh, why did you leave me alone, with no one to love me, no friends and no home? Dark is the night, and the storm rages wild. God pity Bessie, the drunkard's lone child.
There are more verses even more pathetic than that. But
Very moving, very moving. A second number that you've chosen for this part of the program is "A Good Man's Hard to Find."
It's slightly different. And again, it's empowerment in a way. This is a Bessie Smith song. And the story behind this song is, well, Bessie had married this kind of ne'er-do-well guy named Jack G., I believe his name was. And things were always rocky, but they got even rockier when she found out that he was taking her money and setting his mistress up in a show in, I think he was in Ohio somewhere. And she caught wind of this when she was in Cincinnati, and after a show, in full stage makeup and dress, she got in the car, went there, found the guy, dragged him into the dressing room, and beat the heck out of him. And they left the room a complete shambles, and their marriage was over. And this song stems out of her sorry relationship.
find he's loving another gal. You rave to see that man laying in his grave. So if your man is nice, take my advice and kiss him in the morning, kiss him every night. Give him plenty kissing, be sure you love him right. 'Cause a good man nowadays is hard to find. Say it again. Said a good man nowadays is hard to find.
We're out of time. It was a perfect program having you here, and we're going to go off the air, and we're going to ask you to play as we go off the air. It's our music, and on behalf of Janelle, thank you. It's been a wonderful 2 weeks with you, and
Thank
we
you.
look forward to having you back again.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week at this same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.